Hey guys, tonight we begin with the history of the Houston Astros sign-stealing scandal. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. There is something almost sacred about the crack of a wooden bat against a baseball in the hollow cathedral of a summer evening. The sound carries across the diamond like a prayer, echoing off empty seats that will soon fill with the faithful, the hopeful, the dreamers who come to witness something pure in an increasingly complicated world. Baseball, they tell us, is America's pastime, a game built on the mythology of fair play, of earning your victories through sweat and skill, and the peculiar kind of courage it takes to stand in a batter's box while a 90-mile-per-hour fastball hurtles toward you through the thick Houston heat. But what happens when that sacred sound becomes tainted? When the crack of the bat is preceded not by instinct and training, but by the metallic percussion of deception? When the very foundation upon which our national game rests begins to crumble beneath the weight of ambition unchecked and morality abandoned. This is a story about the Houston Astros, about a championship won and lost, about the fragile line between gamesmanship and cheating, and about how quickly heroes can become villains in the court of public opinion. But more than that, it's a meditation on desire. The hungry, consuming desire to win at all costs, to be remembered not just as good, but as great, to etch your name so deeply into the annals of history that time itself cannot erase it. The year was 2017, and Houston was a city still healing. 2 years earlier, Hurricane Harvey had torn through the Gulf Coast like an angry god, leaving behind a landscape of broken dreams and waterlogged memories. The Astros, too, had been rebuilding, not from natural disaster, but from the methodical dismantling that comes with tanking, with deliberately losing in service of some future glory that seems both inevitable and impossibly distant. But by 2017, that future had arrived. The Astros were no longer the lovable losers of the National League, no longer the team that had suffered through a 100-loss season with the kind of stoic resignation that builds character in both players and fans. They had transformed themselves into something magnificent and terrible, a juggernaut of young talent and veteran savvy, a team that seemed destined not just to compete, but to dominate. Jose Altuve stood barely 5 feet 6 inches tall, but he carried himself with the dignity of a giant. His swing was a thing of beauty, compact, violent, precise. When he connected, the ball seemed to leap off his bat with the kind of authority that made grown men stand and cheer, that made children believe in magic. Carlos Correa moved across the shortstop position with the fluid grace of a dancer, his glove an extension of his will, his arm a cannon that could throw strikes to first base from the most impossible angles. And then there was George Springer, whose playoff heroics would eventually earn him World Series MVP honors, his bat alive with the electricity of October baseball. This was a team built for greatness, assembled through years of careful planning and patient suffering. General Manager Jeff Luhnow had orchestrated a rebuild that was both ruthless and brilliant, stockpiling draft picks and international signings, developing a farm system that produced talent like an assembly line of dreams. Manager A.J. Hinch, with his quiet intensity and analytical mind, seemed perfectly suited to guide these young stars through the crucible of championship expectations. Minute Maid Park, with its quirky dimensions and retractable roof, became a fortress. The Crawford boxes loomed in left field like a promise of home runs, while the train that ran along the outfield wall celebrated each Astros victory with a whistle that seemed to echo across all of Houston. The fans, long-suffering and eternally hopeful, packed the stadium night after night, their orange and navy jerseys creating a sea of color that pulsed with every pitch, every swing, every moment of drama that unfolded under the dome. But beneath this beautiful surface, something darker was taking root. In the bowels of minute-made park, behind the scenes and away from the cameras, a plan was being hatched that would forever change how we think about competition, about fairness, about the very nature of the game itself. It began, as many stories of moral compromise do, with a simple rationalization. Every team tries to steal signs. It's part of the game, as old as baseball itself. A runner on second base might pick up the catcher's signals and relay them to the batter through subtle gestures. A coach in the third base box might notice a pitcher tipping his pitches, telegraphing his intentions through some unconscious habit. This is gamesmanship, the kind of strategic thinking that separates the merely talented from the truly intelligent. But what if you could take this ancient practice and enhance it with modern technology? What if you could use cameras and computers and the kind of real-time analysis that was revolutionizing every aspect of the game? What if you could give your hitters not just an educated guess about what pitch was coming, but absolute certainty? The scheme that emerged was both brilliant and brazenly simple. A camera positioned in center field, its lens trained on the catcher's signs, would capture every signal in real time. This feed was routed to a monitor in the tunnel between the dugout and the clubhouse, where team employees would watch and decode. Once they knew what pitch was coming, they needed a way to communicate this information to the batter. Something subtle, something that wouldn't attract attention from umpires or opposing teams or anyone else who might be watching. They chose the sound of percussion. A trash can, positioned in the tunnel, would be struck with a bat or a massage gun. One bang for an off-speed pitch, two bangs for a slider, silence for a fastball. The sound would carry across the dugout and onto the field, audible to the batter but disguised as the random noise of a baseball clubhouse. The kind of background percussion that accompanies every game but never draws attention. It was ingenious in its simplicity, terrifying in its effectiveness. Imagine standing in the batter's box, that lonely place where every hitter must face his demons, where split-second decisions determine the difference between glory and failure. Now imagine knowing with absolute certainty what pitch is coming. The fastball that would have surprised you becomes a batting practice meatball. The curveball that would have buckled your knees becomes a hanging breaking ball, ripe for destruction. The psychological advantage was perhaps even greater than the physical one. Hitting a baseball is often called the most difficult skill in professional sports. A battle between pitcher and batter that plays out in the theater of the mind as much as in the box score. When you remove uncertainty from that equation, when you eliminate the fear of being fooled, the entire dynamic shifts. Confidence replaces anxiety, aggression replaces caution, and suddenly the impossible becomes inevitable. As the 2017 season unfolded, the Astros began to take on an almost supernatural quality. Their offense, already formidable, became historically dominant. They led the American League in virtually every offensive category, their hitters displaying a patience and selectivity that seemed to border on prescience. They worked deep counts, fouled off tough pitches, and waited for their moments with the kind of discipline that typically takes years to develop. Their home splits were particularly remarkable. While most teams enjoy some advantage playing in familiar surroundings, the Astros' home field advantage seemed almost comically lopsided. They hit for higher averages, drew more walks, and struck out less frequently than any reasonable statistical analysis could explain. Visiting pitchers, many of them seasoned veterans who had succeeded in ballparks across both leagues, seemed to lose their command the moment they stepped onto the Minute Maid Park mound. But, perhaps most tellingly, they seemed to know things they shouldn't know. Two-strike counts, those moments when pitchers traditionally reach into their bag of tricks for their most devastating offerings, became opportunities rather than obstacles. Astros hitters would foul off pitchers' best stuff with casual ease, then turn around and drive mistake pitches with authority that suggested they had been sitting on them all along. The postseason arrived like a fever dream, each series more improbable than the last. The Astros dispatched the Boston Red Sox in the division series with businesslike efficiency, their hitters continuing to display that uncanny ability to know what was coming. Carlos Correa launched home runs that seemed to carry the weight of destiny. Jose Altuve swung the bat like a man possessed, his small frame generating power that defied physics and logic. The American League Championship Series against the New York Yankees was a different kind of theater entirely. Here were two teams with rich histories and bottomless resources, two franchises that understood the weight of October expectations. The Yankees, with their pinstripes and their mystique, represented everything that baseball tradition held sacred. The Astros, still relatively new to success, carried the hunger of the recently converted. Game after game, the series seesawed back and forth, each victory seeming to shift momentum permanently until the next loss swung it back again. But through it all, the Astros maintained that same preternatural confidence, that sense that they possessed some secret knowledge that their opponents lacked. When the series reached its climax in Game 7, it felt like destiny itself was holding its breath. And then came the World Series, that annual celebration of baseball's highest aspirations, where legends are born and dreams are either fulfilled or shattered against the harsh reality of failure. The Los Angeles Dodgers waited as their opponents, a franchise with its own rich history and championship pedigree, a team that had spent the previous decade knocking on the door of ultimate success, only to see it remain stubbornly closed. What followed was perhaps the greatest World Series in baseball history. 7 games of pure theater. Dramatic tension stretched to its breaking point. Moments of individual brilliance woven together into a tapestry of collective achievement. Game 5 alone, that 10-inning marathon that ended 13-12 in favor of the Astros, contained enough drama to fuel a dozen ordinary seasons. Alex Bregman's walk-off single in the bottom of the 10th sent Houston into delirium, the sound echoing off the roof of Minute Maid Park like thunder from the gods themselves. But it was Game 7 that would define everything that followed. In baseball, Game 7 of the World Series occupies a special place in the pantheon of athletic achievement. It represents the ultimate test, the moment when preparation meets opportunity on the largest possible stage. Every pitch matters. Every at-bat carries the weight of history. Every decision reverberates through the decades that follow. The game unfolded with the kind of methodical tension that only October baseball can provide. Each half-inning felt like an eternity, each plate appearance a lifetime condensed into a few minutes of pure concentration. The Dodgers, led by their own collection of superstars, matched the Astros punch for punch, their lineup featuring Clayton Kershaw and Corey Seager and Justin Turner, players whose talents needed no artificial enhancement to shine on baseball's biggest stage. But in the end, it was the Astros who prevailed, 5-1. Their victory sealed by a George Springer home run that sailed into the Houston night like a shooting star. As confetti fell and champagne flowed, as fans poured into the streets of Houston to celebrate their first championship in franchise history, the trash can sat silent in its tunnel, its secret mission complete. The celebration that followed was everything a championship celebration should be. Houston, a city that had endured so much heartbreak in recent years, finally had its moment of pure joy. The parade drew hundreds of thousands of fans, their faces painted with the kind of happiness that comes only from shared triumph. Players wept openly, their emotions raw and unfiltered in the face of achievement so long sought and finally attained. Jose Altuve, the tiny giant who had come to embody everything admirable about the franchise, held the World Series trophy above his head with tears streaming down his face. This was the culmination of a journey that had begun in Venezuelan sandlots, progressed through minor league bus rides and major league growing pains, and ended here in this perfect moment of validation and victory. For nearly 2 years, this was how the story ended. The 2017 Houston Astros were remembered as a team of destiny, a collection of young stars who had overcome adversity to claim their place among baseball's immortals. Their victory was celebrated not just in Houston, but across the sport, a reminder that in baseball, as in life, patience and persistence could ultimately be rewarded with glory. Carlos Correa became the face of a new generation of shortstops, his combination of power and defense setting a new standard for the position. Alex Bregman emerged as one of the game's most complete players, equally dangerous with his bat and his glove. George Springer's postseason heroics earned him a place in World Series lore, his clutch hitting joining the pantheon of October legends. But even as the Astros basked in their championship glow, the seeds of revelation were already being planted. Baseball is a sport that thrives on routine, on the familiar rhythms of a 162-game season, on the 1,000 small details that make up the fabric of daily life in a major league clubhouse. It is also a sport populated by human beings, with all the complexity and contradiction that humanity entails. Some players, even within the Astros organization, had grown uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. The scheme had evolved and expanded beyond its original parameters, becoming more sophisticated and more brazen. What had started as a small group of collaborators had grown into a more widespread operation, involving players and coaches and front office personnel at multiple levels of the organization. Mike Fears, a pitcher who had been part of the 2017 Astros team, carried the weight of what he had seen like a stone in his chest. A veteran journeyman who had bounced between organizations throughout his career, Fears understood the unwritten codes that governed clubhouse life, the omerta that protected team secrets from outside scrutiny. But he also understood something deeper about competition, about the sanctity of the game he had dedicated his life to playing. The 2018 season passed without major incident, the Astros remaining competitive but falling short of their championship aspirations. The Red Sox, led by their own collection of superstars, claimed that year's World Series, their victory seemingly legitimizing the natural order of baseball competition. But the secret remained, festering like an untreated wound, growing heavier with each passing month. By 2019, the weight of silence had become unbearable for some. The scheme had continued, though perhaps not with the same systematic efficiency that had characterized its championship year. Players had come and gone, carrying pieces of the truth with them to new organizations. Coaches had moved on to different teams, their memories intact and their consciences troubled. It was in this atmosphere of mounting tension that Mike Fears made his decision. In November 2019, nearly 2 years after the championship celebration had ended, he spoke to The Athletic, a digital sports publication known for its investigative reporting and in-depth coverage. His words, carefully chosen but devastating in their implications, would shatter the comfortable mythology that had surrounded the 2017 Astros. That whole team cheated, Fears said, his voice carrying the weight of finally released truth. And I just want the game to be cleaned up a little bit because there are guys who are losing their jobs because they're going in there not knowing. The revelation hit the baseball world like a seismic event, its aftershocks rippling through every corner of the sport. Here was a former player, speaking on the record, describing a systematic scheme that had undermined the very foundations of competitive integrity. The trash can banging, the stolen signs, the technological surveillance, all of it emerged into the harsh light of public scrutiny. The Athletics investigation, led by reporters Ken Rosenthal and Ivan Drellich, painted a picture of organizational complicity that extended far beyond a few rogue individuals. This was not the work of a couple of overzealous players or coaches operating in isolation. This was a comprehensive operation that required coordination, resources, and the tacit approval of leadership at multiple levels. The details, when they emerged, were both damning and almost absurd in their simplicity. The trash can, that most humble of receptacles, had been transformed into an instrument of deception. Video emerged of games from 2017, the audio enhanced to reveal the metallic percussion that had provided such a decisive advantage. Bang, bang, bang. Silence, the rhythm of cheating, preserved forever in the digital record. Major League Baseball, faced with the most serious integrity scandal since the steroid era, launched an investigation that would ultimately encompass months of interviews, document reviews, and forensic analysis. Commissioner Rob Manfred, a lawyer by training who had spent years navigating the complex politics of professional sports, found himself confronting a crisis that threatened to undermine public confidence in the game itself. The investigation revealed a scheme that was both more extensive and more brazen than initial reports had suggested. The sign stealing had begun in 2016, evolved throughout 2017, and continued in various forms into 2018. It had involved not just players but coaches, trainers, and front office personnel. It had been discussed openly in team meetings, implemented with institutional resources, and executed with the kind of systematic precision that suggested organizational endorsement at the highest levels. Carlos Beltran, the veteran slugger who had joined the Astros for the 2017 season as his career was winding down, emerged as a central figure in the scheme's implementation. His experience and credibility within the clubhouse had been crucial in gaining player buy-in for the operation. Beltran, a future Hall of Fame candidate who had spent 2 decades earning respect throughout the sport, had allegedly been instrumental in refining the system and ensuring its effectiveness. Alex Cora, the Astros' bench coach in 2017 who had gone on to manage the Boston Red Sox to their own World Series championship in 2018, was implicated as another key architect of the scheme. The revelation that the scandal potentially extended beyond Houston to other organizations only deepened the crisis of confidence that was engulfing the sport. The punishments, when they came, were swift and severe by baseball standards, but somehow felt inadequate given the scope of the transgression. The Astros were fined $5 million, the maximum allowable under the league's constitution. They were stripped of their first and second round draft picks for 2020 and 2021. General Manager Jeff Luhanow and manager A.J. Hinch were suspended for 1 year, penalties that were quickly rendered moot when Astros owner Jim Crane fired both men within hours of the punishments being announced. But perhaps most controversially, the players were granted immunity in exchange for their cooperation with the investigation. This decision, while legally pragmatic, struck many observers as fundamentally unjust. The players, after all, had been the direct beneficiaries of the cheating, their statistics inflated, and their reputations enhanced by ill-gotten advantages. Yet they alone among the conspirators escaped punishment, protected by the very cooperation agreement that had made the investigation possible. The 2017 championship remained officially intact, a decision that Manfred justified by arguing that it was impossible to determine what impact the sign stealing had actually had on the outcome of games. This reasoning, while perhaps legally sound, felt hollow to many fans and observers who had watched the Astros' unprecedented offensive performance throughout that season and postseason. The aftermath was brutal and swift. Carlos Beltran, who had been hired to manage the New York Mets, was forced to resign before managing a single game. Alex Cora was fired by the Boston Red Sox, his 2018 championship now viewed through the lens of suspicion and doubt. The entire sport seemed to be grappling with questions about the legitimacy of recent success and the extent to which technological advantages had corrupted the game's essential fairness. But nowhere was the backlash more intense than in Houston itself. The players who had been heroes just months earlier were now pariahs, their every public appearance met with hostility and derision. The 2020 season, shortened by the COVID-19 pandemic, became a nightmare of road games where Astros players were subjected to relentless heckling. Opposing fans banging on trash cans in mocking tribute to their systematic deception. Jose Altuve, the diminutive star who had been the face of the franchise's rise, found himself at the center of particular scrutiny. A subsequent allegation that he had worn a buzzing device during the 2019 playoffs, a claim that was never substantiated but became part of the broader narrative of Astros cheating, transformed him from beloved underdog to suspected villain. His emotional reaction to hitting a pennant-winning home run when he implored teammates not to tear off his jersey in celebration was retroactively interpreted as evidence of guilty knowledge. The psychological toll on the players was evident and extensive. These were young men who had reached the pinnacle of their profession, who had achieved the dreams that had driven them since childhood, only to discover that their greatest triumph was now viewed as fraudulent. They faced questions from reporters, hostility from fans, and skepticism from peers who wondered whether their success had been earned or stolen. Carlos Correa, perhaps the most articulate defender of the team's legacy, attempted repeatedly to explain and contextualize what had happened. In interviews and press conferences, he argued that sign stealing was commonplace throughout baseball, that the Astros had simply been more systematic about something that every team attempted in various forms. His defense, while not without merit, failed to account for the technological sophistication and organizational scope of Houston's operation. Alex Bregman, whose breakout 2017 season had established him as one of the game's rising stars, maintained a lower profile as the scandal unfolded. His statistics from that championship season, a .284 batting average with 19 home runs and 71 RBIs in his first full major league season, were now subject to endless reanalysis and skeptical interpretation. George Springer, the World Series MVP whose postseason heroics had cemented the championship, faced perhaps the most direct challenge to his legacy. His clutch, hitting throughout October 2017, had been the stuff of legend, but the revelation of the sign-stealing scheme cast doubt on every crucial at-bat, every key hit, every moment of individual brilliance that had defined his championship performance. The broader baseball community was forced to grapple with uncomfortable questions about the nature of competition itself. If the Astros had gained such a significant advantage through technological means, what did that say about other teams' efforts to remain competitive? How many organizations were pushing similar boundaries, using similar methods, but simply hadn't been caught? The scandal also highlighted the uncomfortable reality of how modern baseball had evolved. The sport had become increasingly reliant on technology, data analysis, and sophisticated scouting methods. Teams spent millions of dollars on video equipment, statistical analysis, and technological infrastructure designed to gain competitive advantages. The line between acceptable innovation and unacceptable cheating had become blurred, and the Astros had clearly crossed it, but by how much and with what level of culpability remained subjects of intense debate. Veterans throughout the sport expressed their anger and disappointment with varying degrees of intensity and eloquence. Some, like pitcher Mike Clevenger, didn't mince words. "I don't think it should be overlooked that they should probably vacate the title." Others, like Trevor Bauer, used social media to highlight statistical anomalies in Astros' performance that the sign-stealing scheme could explain. The Dodgers, who had lost that epic 7-game World Series to Houston, found themselves in the peculiar position of being retroactive victims of the biggest scandal in modern baseball history. Their own championship drought, which had extended back to 1988, took on new meaning in light of the revelation that their most recent opportunity may have been stolen through systematic deception. Justin Turner, the Dodgers' veteran third baseman who had been a key figure in that 2017 World Series, expressed the frustration that many players felt. "You're talking about a ring that could have been mine, could have been the whole group of guys that worked their tails off, not just that year, but for years before that to get us in position." His words captured something essential about what had been lost. Not just games or statistics, but the intangible sense of fairness that makes competition meaningful. The Los Angeles organization, for their part, maintained a dignified public stance while privately dealing with the profound disappointment of learning that their greatest opportunity in decades may have been compromised by cheating. Manager Dave Roberts, who had made countless strategic decisions throughout that series based on incomplete information, found himself wondering how differently things might have unfolded if the playing field had been level. As the months passed, and the initial shock of the revelations wore off, a more complex picture of the scandal began to emerge. Investigation into other teams revealed that sign-stealing efforts were indeed widespread throughout baseball, though none matched the sophistication and systematic nature of Houston's operation. The Boston Red Sox were investigated and punished for their own technological sign-stealing efforts during their 2018 championship season, though their scheme was deemed less extensive than Houston's. The New York Yankees, one of the sport's most successful franchises, were found to have violated rules regarding the use of their replay phone during the 2017 season, though their punishment was minimal compared to Houston's. These revelations served to support the Astros' argument that their activities existed within a broader context of rule-bending and competitive advantage-seeking that permeated modern baseball. But context, while important for understanding, did little to mitigate the specific impact of what the Astros had accomplished. Their system had been more comprehensive, more effective, and more decisive than anything else uncovered during the investigation. The trash can, banging in particular, represented a level of real-time communication and systematic advantage that went far beyond the occasional stolen sign or technological edge that other teams had employed. Jeff Luhnow, the former general manager whose dismissal had been one of the most immediate consequences of the scandal, maintained his innocence throughout the investigation and its aftermath. In interviews and public statements, he argued that he had not been aware of the sign-stealing scheme and had been made a scapegoat for activities he neither authorized nor condoned. His defense raised important questions about organizational responsibility and the extent to which leadership could be held accountable for the actions of subordinates. Jay Hinch, the former manager, who had also been fired in the immediate aftermath of the investigation, took a somewhat different approach. While not admitting direct culpability, he expressed regret about the situation and acknowledged that, as manager, he bore ultimate responsibility for what happened within his clubhouse. His more conciliatory tone and apparent remorse made him a more sympathetic figure than some of the other central characters in the scandal. The draft pick penalties imposed on the Astros represented perhaps the most significant long-term consequence of the scandal. In a sport where success is largely dependent on the continuous development of young talent, losing first- and second-round picks for 2 consecutive years represented a substantial competitive disadvantage. The picks they forfeited would eventually become other teams' future stars, a constant reminder of the price they had paid for their championship deception. The $5 million fine, while the maximum allowable under baseball's constitution, seemed almost quaint compared to the financial stakes involved in modern professional sports. For an organization that had generated hundreds of millions in revenue during and after their championship season, the monetary penalty represented more of a symbolic gesture than a meaningful deterrent. But the reputational damage was incalculable and enduring. The Astros brand, which had been carefully cultivated over years of rebuilding and community engagement, was permanently tarnished. Their championship, while officially still recognized, would forever carry an asterisk in the minds of fans and historians. Their players, regardless of their individual culpability, would carry the stigma of the scandal throughout the remainder of their careers. The response from Houston fans was complex and evolving. Initial reactions ranged from denial to defiance to disappointment. Some supporters rallied around their team, arguing that the punishment was excessive and that other teams had engaged in similar activities without facing comparable consequences. Others felt betrayed by the revelation that their greatest sports moment had been achieved through systematic deception. The local media, which had celebrated the 2017 championship as enthusiastically as anyone, found itself in the uncomfortable position of reevaluating years of coverage and commentary. Writers and broadcasters who had praised the team's clutch hitting and strategic acumen were forced to reconsider their analysis in light of new information about how that success had been achieved. Minute Maid Park itself became a symbol of the scandal's complexity. The ballpark, with its unique dimensions and retractable roof, had been the site of some of the most memorable moments in franchise history. But it had also been the location where the systematic cheating had been most effective, where home field advantage had been artificially and illegally enhanced. The train that celebrated home runs now seemed to mock the very concept of legitimate achievement. The 2020 season, played largely in empty stadiums due to the COVID-19 pandemic, provided something of a reprieve from the most intense public scrutiny. But when fans were allowed back into ballparks in 2021, the reception for Astros players remained hostile. Opposing fans brought trash cans to games, banged on metal objects throughout Astros at-bats, and created an atmosphere of sustained animosity that was unprecedented in modern baseball. This hostility extended beyond casual fans to include players, coaches, and even front office personnel from other organizations. The Astros found themselves isolated within their own sport, viewed with suspicion and contempt by competitors who felt that the fundamental fairness of competition had been compromised. Trade negotiations, free agent signings, and even casual professional relationships were all affected by the lingering resentment over the scandal. Jose Altuve, in particular, became a lightning rod for criticism and controversy. His diminutive stature, which had once made him a beloved underdog figure, now made him seem like a symbol of deception hiding in plain sight. Every successful at-bat, every clutch hit, every moment of individual excellence was scrutinized through the lens of potential artificial advantage. The buzzer allegations, while never proven, became part of the broader narrative surrounding Altuve's 2019 postseason performance. Video analysis of his reaction to hitting a pennant-clinching home run against the Yankees, when he emphatically gestured for teammates not to remove his jersey, was endlessly dissected by conspiracy theorists and casual observers alike. His explanation, that he was protecting his wife from seeing him without a shirt, struck many as implausible, further fueling speculation about hidden devices. Carlos Correa's attempts to defend the team's legacy and explain the context of their actions were met with skepticism and derision. His intelligence and eloquence, once viewed as assets that made him an ideal spokesperson for the franchise, now seemed like evidence of calculated manipulation. His statistical analysis of the team's home and road splits, meant to demonstrate that the sign stealing hadn't been as effective as critics claimed, was dismissed as self-serving and misleading. The psychological impact on these players, young men who had achieved the highest level of success in their chosen profession, only to see that success questioned and diminished, was profound and lasting. They continued to play at the highest level, their natural talents ensuring continued productivity, but the joy and innocence that had characterized their early success had been irretrievably lost. Alex Bregman's evolution from rising star to established veteran was complicated by the cloud of suspicion that hung over his breakout season. His continued excellence in subsequent years helped to establish his legitimacy as a player, but questions about his 2017 performance lingered. The distinction between what he had accomplished through natural ability and what had been enhanced by artificial advantage remained a subject of debate and speculation. George Springer's departure from Houston in free agency following the 2020 season represented a symbolic end to the championship era. His signing with the Toronto Blue Jays was viewed by many as an opportunity for him to escape the controversy and rebuild his reputation in a new environment. The World Series MVP award from 2017 remained on his resume, but its significance had been permanently altered by the scandal's revelations. The broader impact on baseball itself was significant and multifaceted. The sport's governing bodies were forced to implement new rules and monitoring systems designed to prevent similar schemes in the future. Electronic devices were banned from dugouts and clubhouses during games. Video replay systems were modified to limit access and prevent misuse. New penalties were established for sign-stealing violations, with punishments severe enough to serve as meaningful deterrents. But beyond the structural changes, the scandal had altered something more fundamental about how the game was perceived and discussed. The relationship between tradition and innovation, between respecting baseball's heritage and embracing technological advancement, became more complex and contentious. Fans, players, and media members found themselves questioning not just what the Astros had done, but what other teams might be doing, and what the future of competitive integrity looked like in an increasingly technological age. The Hall of Fame implications were particularly thorny. Players like Carlos Beltran, whose career achievements would normally have guaranteed induction, found their candidacies complicated by their involvement in the scandal. The intersection between individual excellence and team-based deception created unprecedented challenges for voters trying to evaluate legacies fairly and comprehensively. Statistical analysis of the Astros' 2017 season became a cottage industry among baseball researchers and data analysts. Every metric was dissected, every at-bat was analyzed, every pitch was scrutinized for evidence of artificial advantage. Some studies suggested that the sign stealing had provided massive benefits, while others argued that the impact had been more modest. The truth likely lay somewhere in between, but the very existence of the debate highlighted how fundamentally the scandal had altered perceptions of that championship season. The Dodgers' response to learning they had potentially been cheated out of a World Series was measured but unmistakably bitter. While they maintained official silence on calls to vacate the Astros title, individual players and coaches made their feelings clear through various channels. The knowledge that they had been competing against opponents with access to information that should have been secret added a layer of frustration and anger that time did little to diminish. Other teams that had faced the Astros during the 2017 season and postseason found themselves reevaluating their own performances and wondering what might have been different. The Yankees, who had lost that epic ALCS to Houston, publicly called for the title to be vacated. Their own close loss took on new meaning in light of the revelations about systematic cheating. The Red Sox, whose own championship the following year had been achieved with the help of their own sign-stealing scheme, found themselves in the uncomfortable position of being both victim and perpetrator. Their 2018 title remained intact, but the revelation of their own technological violations made their moral position more complicated. As years passed and the initial shock of the revelations faded, a more nuanced understanding of the scandal began to emerge. The Astros had clearly crossed lines that shouldn't have been crossed, had gained advantages that fundamentally compromised competitive integrity, and had done so with a level of systematic organization that made their violations particularly egregious. But they had also operated within a broader culture of rule-bending and competitive advantage-seeking that permeated modern baseball. Their scheme had been more effective and more comprehensive than others, but it existed within a continuum of activities designed to gain edges through technological and analytical means. The players who had participated in the scheme continued their careers, some thriving despite the controversy, others struggling under the weight of public scrutiny and personal guilt. Jose Altuve remained one of the game's most productive players, his natural ability ensuring continued success even as questions about his past performance lingered. Carlos Correa signed a lucrative, long-term contract, his talent overriding concerns about his involvement in the scandal. Alex Bregman continued to develop into one of the sport's premier players, his post-2017 performance helping to establish his legitimacy, independent of any artificial advantages. George Springer found success in Toronto, his World Series MVP credentials intact, but forever complicated by the circumstances under which they were earned. The Houston.